You've heard of skeletons in the closet. But what about a fortune sealed behind plaster and brick? When 28-year-old Alice received the keys to a decaying estate everyone in town feared, she thought she was inheriting a nightmare. Instead, she swung a sledgehammer and uncovered a 70-year-old multi-million-dollar secret. Alice Jenkins was drowning. A high school history teacher living in a cramped Boston apartment. She was buried under a mountain of student loans and medical bills left behind by her late mother. Every day was a masterclass in survival, meticulously budgeting pennies just to keep the lights on. So, when a heavy, cream-colored envelope arrived bearing the wax seal of a prestigious law firm, she assumed it was another collection notice dressed up in legal intimidation. Instead, it was a summons from Thomas Caldwell, an estate attorney representing a woman Alice barely remembered her maternal great-aunt, Beatrice Sterling. Aunt Beatrice was a family ghost. She was a woman spoken of only in hushed, nervous tones at Thanksgiving dinners, a recluse who lived out her days in a sprawling, dilapidated Victorian mansion in the isolated coastal town of Oak Haven, Maine. She had no children, no friends, and according to family law, hadn't stepped foot off her property since 1978. Alice took the day off work and drove 3 hours north. Sitting in Caldwell's oak-paneled office, she listened in stunned silence as the elderly lawyer adjusted his spectacles and read from Beatrice's final testament. To my great-niece, Alice Jenkins, I leave the entirety of the Sterling estate, including the property known as Blackwood Manor and all its remaining assets, Caldwell read, his voice dry as autumn leaves. He paused, looking over his glasses at Alice. However, there is a stipulation, a highly unusual one. Alice's heart, which had just soared at the prospect of financial salvation, plummeted. What kind of stipulation? You must reside within Blackwood Manor for 30 consecutive days and nights, Caldwell explained, sliding a heavy iron key across the desk. You may not host guests. You may not hire contractors. You must sleep under its roof every single night. If you vacate the premises for longer than 12 hours, or if you abandon the house before the 30 days are up, the deed automatically transfers to the Oak Haven Historical Society. It sounded absurd. It sounded like the setup to a cheap horror movie. But the property was appraised at nearly $1.2 million, even in its severe state of disrepair. It was Alice's ticket out of debt. I'll do it, Alice said, her voice trembling but resolute. Caldwell didn't smile. He simply nodded, his eyes filled with a strange, pitying sorrow. Be careful, Miss Jenkins. There is a reason your aunt isolated herself. The town has stories about that house. Alice arrived at Blackwood Manor just as the sun was dipping below the tree line. The house was an imposing monstrosity of Gothic architecture, featuring jagged roof lines, a wraparound porch choked by dead ivy, and windows that looked out over the overgrown lawn like dark, hollow eyes. The paint, once a pristine white, had peeled away to reveal rotting, grey wood underneath. The town of Oak Haven had already noticed her arrival. When Alice stopped at the local hardware store for cleaning supplies, the cashier, a rugged, tight-lipped man named David Higgins, stared at her credit card. You're the Sterling girl, David noted, his voice low. The bustling store suddenly went completely silent. You shouldn't have come. That house is sick. It drives people mad. Drove your aunt mad. Drove her husband away. I appreciate the concern, Alice said politely, grabbing her bags, but I'm just here to clean it out. Her first night in Blackwood Manor was a test of her sanity. The house was freezing, the ancient radiator pipes groaning and hissing like dying animals. Alice set up a sleeping bag in the parlour, the only room that didn't smell intensely of mildew and decay. Around 2 a.m., the noises started. It wasn't just the wind or the settling of old timber. It was a rhythmic, deliberate sound. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like footsteps, but they weren't coming from the floorboards above her. The sound was muffled, distant, and utterly terrifying. Alice sat up, her flashlight beam cutting through the dusty darkness. She pressed her ear against the faded floral wallpaper of the parlour. The sound stopped instantly. She held her breath, the silence pressing in on her, suffocating and heavy. Then, right beside her ear, from inside the wall, came a soft, distinct scratching. Alice scrambled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. She sat in the center of the room, clutching a heavy brass candlestick, watching the walls until the grey light of dawn finally broke through the filthy windows. She wanted to run. She wanted to throw the iron key into the ocean and drive back to Boston. But then she remembered her bank account. She remembered the debt. 30 days. She just had to survive 30 days. By day 4, the initial terror had morphed into a paranoid exhaustion. Alice had scoured the house from top to bottom, trying to rationalize the sounds. Rats, she told herself. Just massive, coastal Maine rats. But her logical facade began to crumble when the visitors started arriving. It began with Richard Gable. Richard was a slick, aggressively charismatic real estate developer from Portland who pulled up to the estate in a silver Mercedes. He wore a suit that cost more than Alice's car and had a smile that didn't quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Ms. Jenkins," Richard said smoothly, leaning against one of the rotting porch pillars as Alice stepped outside. "I'll cut right to the chase. I want to buy this property. I represent a firm looking to build a luxury resort along this coastline. I'm prepared to offer you $500,000 cash today. We can break the stipulation in the will. I have lawyers who eat guys like Thomas Caldwell for breakfast." Alice blinked, caught off guard. "The house is appraised at over $1 million. The land is," Richard corrected, his smile tightening. "The house is a tear down. And frankly, considering the history of your aunt, you don't want to be here. Take the money. Alice, go back to Boston. Leave Oakhaven's secrets in Oakhaven." There was an underlying threat in his tone that made the hairs on Alice's arms stand up. She rejected the offer, locking the heavy oak door in his face. But Richard's visit lit a fire in her. Why was a major developer so desperate for this specific, ruined plot of land? And why the intense rush? Determined to find answers, Alice began digging through Beatrice's belongings. The house was a hoarder's paradise of vintage clothing, expired canned goods, and yellowing newspapers. But in the grand library on the first floor, tucked inside a hollowed-out encyclopedia, Alice found something entirely different, a set of original, hand-drawn blueprints of Blackwood Manor, dated 1922. Being a history teacher, Alice loved primary documents. She spread the fragile blueprints across the dining room table, using teacups to hold down the curled corners. She traced the lines of the house, admiring the intricate details. But as she compared the second-floor layout on paper to her mental map of the house, her brow furrowed. Something was wrong. According to the blueprints, the upstairs hallway extended 35 feet, connecting the master bedroom directly to the guest suite, but Alice had just vacuumed that hallway. She remembered it being a dead end. Grabbing a heavy-duty tape measure, Alice sprinted up the grand staircase. She hooked the end of the tape to the door frame of the master bedroom and walked down the hallway until she hit the solid wall at the end. 27 feet. She stared at the tape measure, her pulse quickening. She did it again. 27 feet. There was an 8-foot discrepancy, 8 feet of house that existed on the blueprints, but had vanished in reality. Alice pressed her hands against the floral wallpaper at the end of the hall. The wall felt solid. But when she knelt down and placed her hand near the heavy oak baseboard, she felt it a steady, freezing draught of air seeping through a microscopic crack. The scratching sounds from the first night echoed in her memory. The walls keep my secrets. Adrenaline surging. Alice ran down to the kitchen and grabbed the heaviest tool she could find, a steel crowbar she had bought, to pry open stuck windows. She marched back up the stairs, stood before the dead-end wall, and took a deep breath. Smash! The crowbar bit into the plaster. Dust exploded into the air, choking her. She coughed but swung again, harder this time. The brittle horsehair plaster cracked and shattered, falling away to reveal a lattice of wooden lath boards. With a feral grunt, Alice jammed the crowbar behind the lath and wrenched it backward. The wood snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. Behind the broken wood, there was no insulation. There were no support beams. There was only a pitch-black void. Alice grabbed her heavy-duty flashlight and shined the beam into the hole. The light cut through a thick curtain of swirling dust, illuminating a narrow, claustrophobic corridor that ran parallel to the hallway. She spent the next hour frantically tearing down the wall, her hands blistering and bleeding, until the hole was large enough for her to slip through. Stepping into the hidden corridor felt like stepping back in time. The air was remarkably dry, smelling of old paper, ozone, and dried lavender. At the end of the narrow passageway stood a heavy, steel-reinforced door. It was slightly ajar. Alice pushed it open, the rusted hinges screaming in protest. She stepped into a perfectly preserved room that looked like a snapshot from 1955. A thick layer of dust coated everything. In the center of the room sat a massive, dark oak desk. On it was an underwood typewriter, a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, and a half-empty glass bottle of scotch. But it was what sat against the far wall that made Alice drop her crowbar in shock. It was an enormous, olive-green Mosler safe, the kind used in mid-century commercial banks, and resting on top of it was a framed black-and-white photograph of her great-aunt Beatrice in her youth. But the photo had been violently defaced. The man standing next to Beatrice had been entirely scratched out with a knife, his face obliterated into a chaotic web of deep gouges. Beneath the photograph was a single, yellowed envelope with Alice's name written on it in shaky, hurried cursive. Alice approached the desk, her hands trembling violently as she picked up the envelope. She broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "My dearest Alice." The letter read, "If you are reading this, you have survived the isolation, and you have proven you possess the one trait our family desperately lacks: curiosity. They will come for the house, they will offer you money, and they will threaten your life. Do not let them take it. The fortune inside this safe does not belong to me, nor does it belong to the monsters who have been hunting me for 60 years. Alice looked from the letter to the massive steel safe. I didn't just hide myself away. Alice, the letter concluded, I was standing guard. Find the combination in the ledger, and whatever you do, Do not trust anyone in Oakhaven. The silence in the hidden room was deafening, broken only by the ragged sound of Alice's own breathing. She lowered Aunt Beatrice's letter to the dust-covered mahogany desk, her mind spinning with a terrifying realization. The warning was clear. The threat was not supernatural. The house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by greed. Alice grabbed her heavy-duty flashlight and began tearing through the drawers of the massive oak desk. The top drawers yielded nothing but dried-out inkwells, rusted paperclips, and a leather-bound appointment book from 1957. But as she pulled out the bottom right drawer, it caught slightly on the track. She yanked it completely free, shining her light into the empty cavity. Taped to the bottom of the drawer was a thick, black ledger. She peeled it off, blowing away a cloud of ancient dust, and cracked the spine. The pages were filled with meticulous, handwritten accounting entries, but these were not grocery budgets or household expenses. April 12th, 1958. Transport, $45,000. Origin Providence. Destination, the laundry. May 3rd, 1958 payout, $12,000. Patriarcha. Alice froze. Being a history teacher in Boston, she knew that name. Raymond Patriarcha was the undisputed boss of the New England crime family for decades, running a ruthless syndicate out of Providence, Rhode Island, that controlled the entire northeast underworld in the mid-20th century. She flipped the pages frantically. Beatrice's scratched-out husband, Arthur Sterling, hadn't just been a quiet businessman. He was a shadow accountant for the mob. He had been laundering millions of dollars for the Patriarcha crime family through legitimate coastal shipping businesses. The entries became more erratic toward the end of the ledger. The handwriting grew sloppy. Panicked. November 18th, 1958. They know about the skimming. Capo coming to Oakhaven. I am a dead man. I have to hide the principal. Leaving Beatrice to deal with the shell companies. Arthur hadn't run away with another woman. As the family rumors suggested, he had stolen from the most dangerous men on the East Coast, hid the fortune in his own home, and fled for his life, leaving his wife to face the wrath of the syndicate. Beatrice had walled off the room, swallowed the key, and barricaded herself inside Blackwood Manor for 60 years to protect the stolen wealth and to stay alive. Alice turned to the very last page of the ledger. There, scribbled in red ink, was a cryptic phrase, "The day the devil came to Boston," multiplied by the years we lost. Beneath it was a sequence of heavily circled numbers, November 18th, 58. Alice approached the olive-green Mosler safe. It was a beast of mid-century engineering, featuring a heavy brass dial that felt cold and immovable. She wiped the grime from the numbers. She spun the dial to the right, stopping on 11, then left, past the 0, to 18, then right again, to 58. She grabbed the heavy steel handle and pulled. Nothing. Multiplied by the years we lost. Alice stepped back, her mind racing. What did Arthur mean if he fled in 1958 and the house was sealed up around the same time? She looked back at the ledger. No. The blueprint of the house was dated 1922. That wasn't it. She picked up the framed photograph of Beatrice and the faceless Arthur. Tucked into the bottom corner of the frame was a tiny, faded wedding announcement, clipping from the Oakhaven Gazette. The date of their marriage, November 18th, 1948. Arthur fled exactly 10 years after they were married. 10 years lost. She approached the dial again, 11 times. 10 is 100. 10, which didn't fit a standard 100 number dial. She tried adding, she tried subtracting. Then it hit her. The combination wasn't a math equation, it was the date, offset by 10. She spun the dial, right to 21, left to 28, right to 68. She gripped the handle and pulled, with a heavy, metallic clunk that sent a vibration up her arm. The internal bolts retracted. The massive steel door groaned open, releasing a wave of stale, metallic air. Alice shined her flashlight inside, and her breath hitched in her throat. The safe was packed from top to bottom. On the bottom shelf sat 20 heavy, dull yellow bricks, gold bullion, stamped with 1950s Swiss treasury marks. The middle shelf held stacks of crisp, banded US currency, but they weren't regular bills. They were $1,000 and $10,000 gold certificates, discontinued and incredibly rare. The top shelf contained neatly stacked bundles of bearer bonds, untraceable and fully negotiable. It was a breathtaking, incomprehensible fortune, tens of millions of dollars, sitting in the dark while Alice had been eating instant ramen and dodging debt collectors. "Don't touch them," Alice shrieked, spinning around and raising her crowbar like a baseball bat. Standing in the doorway of the hidden room, illuminated by the beam of a flashlight, was David Higgins, the hardware store cashier. He had a rusted iron skeleton key dangling from his left hand. In his right hand, he held a heavy, black Colt M1911 pistol. "How did you get in here?" Alice demanded, backing against the safe, her knuckles white around the crowbar. David slowly lowered the gun, raising his left hand in a placating gesture. "I used the master key your aunt gave my father 30 years ago. Put the crowbar down, Alice. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have warned you at the store." Alice didn't lower the weapon. "Who are you?" "My name is David Higgins, but my father was William Higgins. He was the chief of police in Oak Haven in the 1970s. David explained, his voice hushed and urgent. He was the only person in this town who believed Beatrice when she said men in suits were terrorizing her at night. He tried to investigate the shell companies Arthur left behind. David's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with old grief. He was killed in a hit-and-run in 1979. The official report said it was a drunk driver, but my dad was a loose end. Beatrice knew it, and so did I. "Richard Gable," Alice whispered, the pieces violently snapping into place. "Gable isn't a real estate developer," David confirmed, stepping fully into the hidden room. His firm, Providence Horizon Holdings, is a modern corporate front for the remnants of the Patriarcha Syndicate. They've been trying to legally acquire this property for decades to tear it down and find the vault. When Beatrice died, they thought it was their chance, but her will locked them out, that 30-day clause that was her giving you time to find this. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of shattering glass echoed from the ground floor. Alice and David both froze. Heavy, synchronized footsteps crunched over the broken glass in the foyer. "Gable," David whispered, stepping forward and shutting the heavy door of the Mosler safe. He spun the dial, locking it. He must have had someone watching the house. He knows you didn't leave. "What do we do?" Alice asked, panic finally seizing her chest. "We call the police. The local cops won't get here in time, and half of them are in Gable's pocket anyway," David said, pulling his phone from his jacket. "I've been working with a contact at the FBI's Organized Crime Division in Boston for 2 years, feeding them everything I could find on Providence Horizon. They're on standby, but they are 20 minutes away." "We don't have 20 minutes," Alice said, as the sound of splintering wood echoed up the main staircase. They were breaking down the barricaded doors on the second floor. "Spread out. Tear the walls down if you have to." Richard Gable's voice boomed from the hallway, stripped of its slick, corporate charm. It was the harsh, violent bark of a desperate man. David grabbed Alice's arm, hauling her out of the hidden room and back into the suffocating dust of the narrow corridor. "We can't go out the way you came in. They'll bottleneck us in the hallway. Does this passage go anywhere else?" Alice shined her flashlight down the pitch-black tunnel. "I don't know. I just broke through a few hours ago." "Move," David urged, pushing her gently forward. They crept down the breathless passage. Through the thin lath and plaster to their right, they could hear the intruders tearing the second floor apart. Furniture shattered against walls. Doors were violently kicked off their hinges. "She's not in the master bedroom," a gruff voice yelled, so close to Alice's ear she nearly dropped her light. "Find her," Gable roared. "She knows something. Look for fresh construction. Look for anything out of the ordinary." Alice and David reached the end of the hidden corridor. It dead-ended into a massive brick chimney breast. Alice's heart plummeted. They were trapped. "It's a dead end," she mouthed, tears of frustration blurring her vision. David ran his hands over the cold, rough bricks, pressing his ear to the masonry. "Victorian houses," he whispered, a grim smile touching his lips. They didn't build secret rooms just for fun. Alice, they built them for servants to move unseen. He pressed hard against a protruding brick at waist height. With a grinding scrape of stone against stone, a section of the chimney breast rotated inward on a central iron pivot. It revealed a pitch-black chute descending into the bowels of the house. A rusted iron ladder bolted securely to the inside. "Go," David commanded, pulling his Colt M1911 and aiming it back down the hidden corridor. "I'll hold them off." "I'm not leaving you," Alice hissed. "Alice, if Gable gets his hands on those ledger books, he buys his way out of a federal indictment, and my father died for nothing," David said, his voice fierce and unwavering. "Get down the ladder. It leads to the coal cellar. Run to the tree line and don't look back." Before Alice could argue, a massive crash shook the wall behind them. Gable's men had found the hole Alice had smashed. Flashlight beams pierced the darkness of the corridor. "There down the passage," a voice shouted. Gunfire erupted. The deafening crack of a pistol firing in the enclosed space was agonizing. David fired back, the muzzle flash illuminating the dust-choked air. Plaster exploded in a shower of white powder as bullets tore through the walls around them. "Go!" David shoved her toward the chimney. Alice scrambled onto the iron ladder, hands slipping on the rusted rungs. She descended rapidly into the suffocating darkness, the sounds of shouting and gunfire echoing terrifyingly above her. Her boots hit the stone floor of the cellar. She swung her flashlight around the cavernous space. She spotted a heavy wooden door with a slanted access hatch at the far end, the coal chute. She ran toward it, lungs burning, just as the basement door at the top of the stairs burst open. She went down. Heavy boots thundered down the wooden steps. Alice threw her entire weight against the iron latch of the coal chute. It was rusted shut. She screamed in frustration, grabbing the steel crowbar she had tucked into her belt and jamming it under the latch. She leveraged it with all her strength. The rusted iron snapped with a loud ping. She threw the doors open, scrambling up the slanted stone chute and tumbling out into the freezing night air. Rain slicked the overgrown grass. She scrambled to her feet and sprinted toward the dense pine tree line at the edge of the property. She hit the cover of the trees just as two of Gable's men spilled out of the coal hatch, sweeping the yard with high-powered flashlights. Alice threw herself behind the thick trunk of an ancient oak, pressing her face into the wet bark. Footsteps squelched in the mud, growing closer. Alice closed her eyes, clutching the crowbar. Suddenly, the night sky was fractured by blinding bursts of light. Not flashlights, but the intense, strobing red and blue of law enforcement light bars. A convoy of black SUVs and state police cruisers tore up the winding driveway of Blackwood Manor, sirens wailing. Heavily armed FBI tactical agents poured out of the vehicles, swarming the perimeter. "FBI, drop your weapons. Get on the ground," a voice boomed over a megaphone. The men hunting Alice froze, dropping their flashlights as laser sights painted their chests. Alice slumped against the tree, sliding into the cold mud. She watched through the branches as Richard Gable was dragged out the front doors in handcuffs, his face pale with fury and defeat. A few moments later, David emerged, flanked by two federal agents. He was clutching his bleeding shoulder, but he was alive. He looked out toward the tree line and gave a weak nod. The aftermath was a media circus. The discovery of a $40 million mob fortune sealed inside a coastal Maine mansion made national headlines for months. The FBI confiscated the ledger, using Arthur Sterling's meticulous notes to officially dismantle Providence Horizon Holdings, resulting in 27 federal indictments. Because the gold certificates and bullion were proceeds of organized crime, the government seized them. However, Aunt Beatrice's legal foresight and the estate's complex trust structure meant the bearer bonds fell into a massive legal gray area. After a grueling 6-month legal battle, Thomas Caldwell managed to negotiate a settlement. Alice was awarded a 15% finder's fee for the gold and legally retained half the value of the bearer bonds. It amounted to roughly $6.8 million. Alice paid off her mother's medical debt in a single afternoon. A year later, Alice stood on the wraparound porch of Blackwood Manor. The dead ivy was gone. The exterior was painted a vibrant Victorian blue. The massive oak doors stood wide open, inviting the ocean breeze inside. David Higgins pulled up in a brand-new pickup truck, toolbox in hand. They had spent the last year restoring the house and piecing together the true history of Oakhaven. "Contractors finished the second-floor drywall," David said, leaning against the freshly painted railing. "The hidden corridor is officially gone. It's just a regular hallway now." "Good," Alice smiled, looking out over the manicured lawn. "I think this house has held on to enough secrets. It's time to let the light in." She didn't just inherit a house, she inherited a legacy of survival. As Alice walked back inside her sunlit home, she knew the watch was finally over. If you loved this incredible, true-to-life story of mystery, hidden millions, and surviving the odds, there are plenty more secrets to uncover. Hit that like button if the twist completely caught you off guard. Share this video with your true crime-obsessed friends. And don't forget to subscribe for more wild, untold stories of hidden history and fortune. Let us know in the comments what you would do if you found a secret safe.